All right, today we're going to talk about a topic that I think is very, very important. It is business lessons from politics. Now, let me set the stage a little bit before we jump into it. If you are looking for someone to tell you which politician you should vote for because that's more favorable for business, I will tell you, you are not in luck because that's not what I'm doing here. What I'm going to talk about here are some common things that we see in the political process and in campaigns very often that, when we see it in political campaigns, a lot of us notice that it's things that we don't like. But what I find to be very interesting is that a lot of people are taking the things that they don't like about politics and those habits, those patterns, and they're doing the same thing in their business. And so, what I want to do is, I want to talk about some of those similarities between what we don't like about the political process and how some business owners are actually doing the same thing in their business. And then we're going to talk about what can you do to fix that, to resolve those issues so that you can build your business in a healthy way. So stay tuned. So we are back. Like I said, today's episode this one is a little bit, I guess I kind of hesitated about this one a little bit. And part of that is because, based on the world that we live in right now, there's a lot of controversy around politics and people really finding like, what team am I on? What group am I a part of? This is my group and your group is absolutely wrong. And to where just the idea and the thought of politics when it comes up, I mean, you can say one word and it just really rubs people the wrong way. I mean, and it's very interesting to see that. And so that's why I kind of hesitate about it. But to be honest with you, I was like, there are too many lessons that can be learned that business owners can take from what we see in politics, like the stuff about politics that we don't like. But then when you look at how business owners are running their business, a lot of times we're seeing them do some of the same things that they don't like in politics in their business. And for myself, my background is accounting and finance. So when I'm spending time working with business owners and I'm looking at their numbers, I'm like, yep, it's kind of obvious why your business is struggling financially because you're doing some of these same things in the way you run your business. And if you don't change those things, you're going to struggle in your business. Now, I will say, when you're talking about politics, something you always got to put out the disclaimer of and letting people know this episode of the show is not about trying to tell you who you should or who you shouldn't vote for. And to be honest with you, I'm not really going to talk about any, many candidates. I mean, you may see a slide where I bring up a slide with some politicians on it, but to be honest with you, we're going to really dive into more of just the way that the campaigns or how their campaigns or their time in office think how that happens and how that relates to business. Now, I will say I am not going to really talk about a ton of, controversial things other than there is one controversial topic that I am going to bring up. Now, this is only controversial if you're a fan of American football, or if you're a fan of American football, this one may be a little controversial. And let me bring up full screen so you guys can see, because today I am wearing my Tampa Bay Buccaneers jersey. And the reason why I'm wearing this jersey is because I believe, and this may be controversial to you, but it is not controversy to me, and hopefully I'm not wrong about this, is my team is going to the Super Bowl. Now, I am filming this actually in January of 2022. Happy New Year to everyone that is watching. And my absolute hope is that my team is going to the Super Bowl. Now, if they end up proving me wrong and they lose in the playoffs, what I will say is just imagine that I am filming this in January of 2021, just before they actually did win the Super Bowl. So I got all the controversy out there. My team is going to the Super Bowl. Your team is, well, your team might be the team we beat in the Super Bowl. So maybe you're going to the Super Bowl. But if you're in the same conference as Tampa Bay Buccaneers, your team ain't going to the Super Bowl because my team is going to the Super Bowl. Again, If I end up being wrong, just imagine I filmed this in January of 2021 when my team did go to the Super Bowl and they won, and Tom Brady got another ring. So let's jump into the topic. Now, when it comes down to, politics, like I said, a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about it. That's why I really like to, really let people know. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, because even when you look at the last series of presidents that we've had now, these presidents have spanned many, many years. And I will be honest with you, these are the presidents that I'm most familiar with. One is because I'm not that old. I am in my mid 30s at the time of filming this. And at the moment, these are the presidents that I remember. Now, of course, Ronald Reagan was in office. I personally don't remember much about Reagan's administration. Part of it is because, I was just too young to really wrap my mind around it. So I don't remember too much about his administration. But one of the things that the reason why I bring this up is because what I'm going to talk about are things that they aren't just like specific to the left or the right. There's something that you tend to see whether you're a Democrat or Republican, and even an independent or a liberal, you tend to see these things or these characteristics or these activities tend to happen more and more. And the thing is, no matter who you like or who you don't like, when you see these things come up, they really aren't things that tend to rub you, the right way, or they're things that tend to, really kind of turn you off about that person. Now, you may have so much dislike for the opposition that you're able to work through it, and you're able to then just say, hey, you know what? This part about him I don't like. I don't like this, but I really don't like the other person so much that I'll just kind of live with it. And to be honest, as I've talked to people over the years, I mean, people have said that about every single president. I mean, there are things that people have seen in every president where they're like, you know what, I don't like this, I don't like this, but I don't like the other guy or the other lady, as I don't like them, or say, I dislike them more. So I'm still going to go through with this. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because it is very important to know and to remember, because when it comes down to business, you don't, in essence, you're not really trying to make a decision between this business, or let's say three different options or whatever. You're really making a decision off of almost an infinite number of options. Whereas if you're running a political campaign, one of the ideas is to be, I guess it's just to make it difficult for people to vote for your opponent, because typically in a presidential race, you're running against one other person. Well, when it comes down to business, you have a ton of options. Think about, if you wanted to buy, if you wanted to get cell phone service, now you have multiple options. Whereas if you're Verizon, you can't just, be better than Sprint or T-Mobile now, as they've combined. You have to also be better than other options that are out there. I mean, you have cable companies like, Spectrum, which is getting into the cell phone space. I mean, you have things like, Boost Mobile and all these other different options. It's not just a one-on-one opponent fight. So there are things that are done in a typical political campaign that people say, even if it is the candidate that you support, even when your candidate does it, you notice it and you're like, I don't really like that. Now, you still vote for them because you just don't like the other option. But when it comes down to business, there are things that you do in business, and especially when it comes down to your marketing, there are things that you do that when potential customers see it, they're like, I don't really like that. And I have a number of other options that I can choose from. So I am not going to do business with you because there are other people that I can find and other businesses that I can find because I have more options. So the first thing that you tend to see a lot of when it comes down to political campaigns, for whether that's presidential, all the way down to, a school board official. Usually don't see it as much on the lower end, more on the, I guess you say, the top of the ticket, to use a political term is, when you see like those higher positions like, your presidents, your senators, your governors, something that you tend to see a lot of that really doesn't sit well with a lot of people is trashing others. So, what I mean by this is when a candidate spends time, more time talking about how bad the other option is or how bad the other person is, that ends up being a something that when you talk to a lot of people, they really don't like that because a lot of people are like, what? I really want to know, what do you stand for? Like, what is it about you? Like, don't spend all your time telling me about how bad the other person is. Now, again, when you're running a political race and it's just you versus one other person, you might be able to get by with this. But when you're running a business, if you are talking about your product and you're talking about your number one competitor, and you're talking about how bad your other competitor is and you're trashing that competitor, what people tend to do is they're like, what? There's something about you that just doesn't feel right. I'm going to go to another option. For example, look at a restaurant. Now, we are surrounded by restaurants. And let's say if this restaurant here, restaurant number one, spent all of his time talking about how restaurant number two is bad, the people who are seeing that advertisement or the people who are hearing that constantly, they may agree, hey, you know what? I'm not going to go to restaurant number two, but I have restaurant number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. I have all these other options. So I'm going to leave restaurant 1 and 2 alone, and then I'm going to go to another option. Now, when it comes down to your business, part of the thing that you have to ask yourself is, and you see this a lot when some people do sales pitches where they're spending all their time trying to convince the customer that, hey, the competitor or the other option is bad and you should stay away from them, you should avoid them. Well, what that does in a business environment is it starts to lead people to, it starts to get them to the point where they're constantly finding trash and they're finding bad things. And the thing is, if you train your customers to find bad things about your competitors, eventually they're going to start finding bad things about you. And if you're having them so focused on the negative of your competitors, they're going to get so used to finding negative that they're going to start finding the negative things about your business, and then they're going to choose another option. Another area that becomes very common when it comes down to politics is this anxiety and fear, where a political strategy is to poke people enough to get them so anxious about something, and then to get them in fear about, hey, this could happen, or this is going to happen, or you should be afraid of this. And then what they tend to do is connect the dots to say, these are all the things that you should be afraid of. And my opponent, XYZ, if you vote for him, he's going to make those things happen, or she's going to make all that happen. And, in a political contest, when it's just you versus one other person, maybe you can get away with that because they just don't like the other person enough. But there's something about that even as people are thinking about the person that they want to vote for, like if the person that they are voting for is making them more anxious and bringing up more fear, there's something about us that we're like, what? I wish they would not do that as much. Like, I'm not as in love with what they're doing in this case. But again, I just don't like the other person so much that I'm willing to still vote for them. Like there are other things that I like. Now, when it comes down to business, if your business and your strategy is to make people very anxious and to make people very afraid, eventually people may just start to realize, what? I really don't want to be associated with that. Like maybe I'll just go look at some other options, because a lot of times when I see businesses do this, and they do it a lot in like their marketing and strategy, where they really make you feel like, hey, if you don't buy my product, these are all the things you should be afraid of, and these are all the things that you should be anxious about, and you should be concerned. Like this should be keeping you up at night. And when you see a lot of that in people's marketing strategy, what that tends to do is it tends to train people to be anxious and people to be driven by fear. Now, when they are overly anxious and they are overly in fear, eventually they start to find holes and problems everywhere, including your product and your service. And so this one becomes I guess you say, maybe a little bit of a tension, because one of the things that you see in a lot of strategies is that, they talk about in marketing how, fear sells. And it really does sell, because a lot of people make impulse decisions off of fear and anxiety. Now, if you're building a business and you're trying to build a business for the long term, one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, like, hey, if I want to have a long term, ongoing relationship with this customer, is fear and anxiety the right things that I want to use to build that relationship? I mean, just think about any type of relationship that you were in. If that relationship was based on anxiety and fear, and that was one of the things that really kept that person with you, how healthy or how enjoyable do you think that relationship is going to be in the long run? Now, another area is definitely guilt. And one of the things that I see a lot when it comes down to political campaigns is some candidates tend to use this route where they try to make you feel guilty for not choosing them. It's where it's like, hey, if you choose the other person, then you're part of the problem. If you vote for them, then you're the reason why this happened, or you're the reason why these people don't get what they deserve, because you're part of the problem. And when you really take a step back and you think about it, is that's really a guilt strategy. It's trying to make people feel guilty for doing something other than what they are recommending that you should do. Now, if you're using a guilt strategy in your business, again, eventually it starts to catch up with you, because eventually it's not going to have a positive impact. Now, all of us are very familiar with this. And one of the ways that we've seen this happen a lot is, for example, with charities. It happens a lot with charities where, let's say, charities that use guilt to get people to donate and get people to give and to get people to support. When people are doing that, what, in the beginning, you may give, but eventually, what tends to happen with a lot of people is, if you have been guilted into donating to a cause, you then later on start to look and say, okay, all right, how do I get out of this? Like, I'm no longer like, this is no longer something pleasurable. Like, I'm not happy about giving to this cause. And you start doing things like avoiding them. Like, you know what? If they're, let's say, if you live in a city where they're out on the street and they have a table out on the street, I have seen people literally come out of their office building, walk around the entire block just to avoid that table, because they're like, I feel guilty every time I walk by. And they show those pictures of those kids, and they're really trying to make me guilty about not giving. And I just feel bad every time I walk by there, to where I've seen people add like 15 to 20 minutes to their commute just to avoid having to experience that guilt. I mean, even one of the funny examples that I've seen is, I had a friend who was like, I just feel guilty when I walk past those little girls at the Walmart where they're out there selling the Girl Scout cookies. And I just feel guilty whenever I tell them no. So one of the things that he said is like, instead of walking out the main door, I just go back into the store and I walk all the way to the gardening section, and then go out of the exit of the gardening session, even though I parked on the other side of the parking lot. And it's one of those examples that I'm just like, man, guilt is a way to get people to make an impulse decision. Now, in politics, part of the idea in politics is I need you to go out and vote on this date. So I can guilt you into making a impulse decision on this day. But when you are running a business, one of the things that you really want is you want an ongoing business relationship. Like you want them to buy from you more. And the thing is, if you are guilting someone into doing business with you, that guilt may not be sustainable over a long period of time. So you want to make sure you keep that in mind as you think about building and growing your business. Now, another area that we see that happens a lot when it comes down to politics is this concept that they call spin, where they can take a story and somehow they're going to spin this story around, almost like trying to hypnotize you and say, hey, don't look over here, don't look over here, and hey, here, everything looks all good, all perfect. Yes, I know this negative incident happened, but hey, here's what you should really focus on. And when you see this happening, a lot of times, like when I'm talking to people, even people who have been diehard supporters of a candidate, they're kind of like, something about this story, like, I really like this person, but I wish they would stop doing this. Like, because that wasn't all good. Like, hey, we made some mistakes, we dropped the ball. It's okay to be honest about it. Like, yo, we dropped the ball. You don't have to put spin on it. But what some people do is they say, hey, I just dislike the other option so much that even though I know that they're spinning the story on this, I'm still going to support them. Now, again, when you go back to business, one of the things that I've seen a lot of people do is a lot of people have taken a situation where, hey, there is a unpleasant experience that someone has, and you see this a lot. Let's say if someone has a bad review for a business or they leave a bad review. I've actually seen some business owners or business leaders go on there and actually just start to argue and just try to discredit the person who left the bad review. And it's just like you're trying to, instead of just accepting the reality of the, hey, there are some things that you don't do well. And hey, there are some areas where, hey, the business dropped the ball, own it, and then figure out how do we improve and how do we fix this to make sure that we don't create this issue again. Well, instead of doing that, they just try to go and discredit the person who brought it up, or they try to turn it around and say, well, no, this isn't a bad thing. This is really just a good thing. And that is a very big temptation for us in business and politics and life in general, is we try to take stories and spin it into something else. Now, the reality of it is that as that spinning process happens where someone's trying to spin a story around, people are starting to become more and more aware that, hey, I feel like you're just kind of twisting the story. Like, I can go back and actually look at the facts and I can see what you're telling me now and the facts. Yeah, this story you're spinning isn't actually lining up. And what it starts to do is it starts to break down long term credibility. So, in all of that, the main point that when it comes down to business is really this, is that it's all about relationship. I mean, really, it is all about relationship. And there are four key factors about, having those healthy relationships that you really need to pay attention to, especially when it comes down to your business. But one of the things that we see is it doesn't tend to happen as well when it comes down to politics. I mean, the first one is really just having that clarity. As I said, one of the first challenges that you see about a lot of candidates is they're spending so much time trashing the other person. And part of the reason why that works in politics is because typically you're choosing between two options. So if they put enough trash out about that other person, then you're going to be like, you know what? Yeah, that person has too much dirt on them. Then I know you aren't clean, but I'll pick you anyway because you're cleaner than that option. Well, when it comes down to business, people have a ton of options, which is why one of the most important things that you have to do as a business is be very, very clear about who you are and what problem you solve. Because if you are not clear about who you are as a business and what problem you solve, people will then start to look and realize, like, hey, there are other options out there. Like, you're not the only one, you're not the only name in the game. I'm not just trying to pick between you and someone else. There are a ton of options out there. And as a business owner, and when you're trying to develop your message and your clarity, I mean, that's one of the things that you have to embrace. And to be honest with you, I think you should also include it in your marketing. One of the things that we've done with the TL Turner Group is, we offer bookkeeping and CFO services for small and medium sized businesses. And one of the things that we got very clear on, and I'm very honest about this, is that, you know, there are a ton of options that you can choose to solve the accounting and the finance side of your business. You can buy an online service, you can do it yourself. I mean, you can hire a family or friend, or you can go hire a different accounting firm. But what I am going to be very clear about is we help solve accounting and finance problems for law firms, marketing agencies, churches, and restaurants. Those are the four areas because you have a ton of options. But I'm going to be very clear with you about what problem we solve, and I'm going to be honest that you do have options. Now, one of the ways that I really help them kind of navigate that is, yes, I know you have options, but here's some accountability that I'm going to give you. And I'm going to be very clear with you that, hey, if you choose us, here are the things that you can expect from us. And here's how you know whether we are the right fit for you or whether we are doing a good job. Now, when it comes down to accountability, this one becomes a phenomenal thing if you're trying to build a long-term relationship in business. Is people need to know, okay, all right, I know I know who you are, I know what problem you solve, I know what options are available to me. Now I need to know, how do I score you? Like, how am I going to know that you are doing a good job? And what a lot of people tend to avoid doing is they avoid putting out that scorecard, or they avoid helping their customers understand, how should you evaluate my performance? And when you fail to do that, what that ends up happening is people then start to come up with their own grading scale. And what ends up happening is, if your clients come up with their own grading scale for your performance and you don't know what that grading scale is, what you will find out is that you may not be living up to their expectations. And part of the reason you may not be living up to your expectations is because you didn't actually explain it well. Like, for example, I tell all of my clients, like, hey, I am a certified public accountant, CPA, but taxation is not something that we do. Now, I know when you think about an accountant, the immediate thing that comes to mind for a lot of people is, oh, I can get my taxes done. Well, I tell all of my clients up front, like, hey, we are not a tax service provider. Like, we focus on bookkeeping and CFO services. So I'm helping you understand these are the areas where you can kind of grade us. And then depending on, the specific needs in your business, like, hey, here's what we're going to do over the next 30, the next 90 days, or like, hey, every month you're going to get a report by the 15th of the month, or by this date, we're going to have a meeting every month and we're going to talk about your numbers and so forth. And that becomes the cadence of what we have with all of our clients, because what that allows us to do is, if we miss those deadlines or if we don't live up to expectations, we are going to be held accountable by the client. And that's the way that it should be. Because as people see that, hey, you know what? Terrell told me what to expect, and he told me how to actually grade him. And when I'm able to actually grade him, if he is honest about it, then it will actually help our relationship to stay healthy. Now, honesty is definitely the last point that I wanted to bring up, because when it comes down to politics, especially what we're starting to see more and more now, with more technology being available, is people they aren't trusting politicians. I mean, because you'll see very obvious situations where a politician will be asked a question, well, what did you mean? Why did you say this? And I've seen some politicians actually just come out, oh, that's not what I said. And then the television or the program that they're on, what they'll then do is pull up the actual clip when the person said it and play it. And it's like, is that not you? And the person is like, well, that's just taken out of context. And one of the things that a lot of people leads a lot of people to realize is that, you know what, I don't think you're being on. I don't feel like you're being honest with me. Like, I don't feel like you're actually doing what you said. And even when I call you out on something that is very clearly true, you are denying it or you're trying to dodge it. And when it comes down to your business, one of the things that I think a lot of business owners really, really struggle with is really being honest. Now, part of the reason that they struggle with the honesty is because, I mean, they're in fear is that, hey, if I'm honest, I'm going to lose my customers. Well, when it comes down to business, if you are trying to develop a long term relationship, you got to ask yourself, what is the best interest for the business relationship? Is it best for me to be right, or is it best for me to be honest about this situation? Like when you drop the ball on something, like, one of the things that I talk about in a lot of my content is, when you're hiring a bookkeeper or CFO, one of the things that you really, really need from your accountant is you need them to be, there to be able to communicate and report information to you. So, hey, what's going on with your numbers so you know how to run your business. Well, in 2021, things got really crazy and things were growing. And, there was one client of mine that I had been working with for a while. It's a seasonal client. And to be completely honest with you, I dropped the ball on making sure that they were as informed as they needed to be to make some, on a regular basis. And one of the things that I had to do is I had to reach out to them and be honest, like, hey, being able to know what your numbers are on a regular, more routine, consistent basis is something you should expect from me. I dropped the ball on that this year. And it's my fault, and I got to own that. And when I did that, one of the things that he reached out and said is like, hey, I understand. I know you got a lot going on, and things in the business went fairly well. And I understand, and I really appreciate you being honest with me about that because honesty allows us to keep a healthy relationship. And also, one of the things that I had to do this year is there was a client of mine that, based on the growth in their business, and I came to them and I had to tell the owner, I was like, hey, based on where you guys are growing in your business and how you're growing, it is time for you guys to work with a person who more specializes in this specific aspect of where your business is going. Because based on where your strategy is going, like my firm is not the best fit to support you based on this change that you're trying to make in your business. And being honest with them, one of the things they came back and said, they were like, you know what? I really, really respect the fact that you were honest enough to tell us that, because what that lets me know is that you care about the relationship. And in fact, one of the things they came back and said is like, hey, we want to make sure that we send more people your way because you prioritize protecting the relationship and our business over protecting your own personal and self-interest, because honesty goes a very, very long way in business. Now, as I said, I mean, there are a lot of different things that you can probably learn from watching politics and just thinking about how, lessons that you can learn in business. And one of the things that I think that people really can really start to think about are, what are those key characteristics that you commonly see happening in business that, what, if you were to see those things happen in politics, you'd probably be like, you know what? I don't really like this, and this isn't really my deal. But you kind of put up with it in politics because typically you're trying to choose between two options. You got one option here, one option here. But when it comes down to business, you have a ton of options to choose from. So one of the things that you have to really, really grasp in business is there are some things that we see done in politics that we don't like. And although they have somewhat of the luxury because there's usually only two options, when it comes down to business, you have to make sure those things that you don't like about the political process and the way that politicians approach it is make sure you are not guilty of doing the same thing in your business. Because if you are, the long-term relationship that you could have with your clients, it's just not going to exist. So Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time.
If you'd like to see more of the Business Talk Library, be sure to watch us every week on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m.